I'm Justin Maycat, and this is my brother, Matthew the Cat.
Hey, everybody.
And I am Joe, aka Phantom Meeple, and in one of these corners is Jess CCG.
Hi! And together we form the Adequate Four, a collective YouTube channel focusing on tabletop gaming, mental health, community building, and DEI. And for this video, we are going to chat about social interactions in particular when it comes to tabletop gaming in the time of COVID. As you all have experienced, the COVID-19 pandemic has been going on, and it is still ongoing, even though it has its ups and downs. And so I thought it would be pretty interesting for us to have a conversation about how our gaming has changed, how our social interactions have changed, for good, for the not so good, and everything in between. So as I want to start, I will ask everyone here on screen, how was your gaming experience before COVID? As in, did you have game nights? Did you go to game nights? Did you have people over? Kind of where were you starting in when it came to interacting with others in tabletop gaming? So not necessarily your origin story, but just how did you interact with other people when it came to tabletop games? And I will start it with Justin.
Felt like it was thrown at me. Yeah, so before COVID, one big disclaimer is before COVID, I was just finishing up college. So when COVID started, I had been out of college for like a little more than half a year. So I didn't have a full-time job yet. And with that, I had a lot more time on my hands. So having all that time, no COVID, lots of gatherings were still happening. We were gaming pretty regularly. I would say that we were close to once a week. We would get at least some people over and playing a board game. And I know Matthew and I were still living in the same place together, so we were also just gaming more regularly throughout the week. So I would say before COVID, lots of board gaming was able to happen. I probably played a board game, I would bet like an average of 2 to 3 days a week at minimum. That would be my bet for me from that point.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Matthew?
Yeah, similar for me. I was just coming out of grad school, so I think this is something important to note. I had like no money, so we didn't really have a whole lot of board games. We only had about like 3, I would say, maybe 4 or whatever. It was starting to grow, so we were really into it, but we were playing the same type, like the same game over and over again, which is so much different from what we do now. I kind of miss that actually, but yeah, I would say that we played it pretty often. We played games pretty often beforehand, and it did help that Justin and I lived together, and so did our sister. So the 3 of us were just playing often together anyway.
Did you all have your partners join? Were your partners around during that time?
Yeah, they were, and we introduced them into the board gaming world, starting with catchphrase, actually. So gaming has always been like a big part of our lives. Hobby gaming became more a part of our lives really like right before the pandemic hit.
Interesting.
Like that year leading up to it, I feel like it really
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
All right, cool. Joe, what about you?
Yeah, so for me, in the before times, every once in a while, we'd meet a handful of people, we'd play new games. But as far as Abby and I, we didn't really have anything consistent until actually, I'm gonna turn to my left because she's sitting right there, and she may or may not hear her, but she can answer this question. So when did we find the 18XX group? Was that October 2019 or was that 2018? Do you remember?
It was 2019 because it was right before COVID hit.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. So right before COVID hit. Yes, thank you. But yeah, so in October 2019, we had found a steady 18XX group that we went to every like 2 weeks or so. And that's how we really got heavy into train gaming. And it was a consistent thing. And then I think late February of 2020, early March, we actually had just formed a D&D group. and we did our session 0, and then like 6 days later, everything shut down.
Wow. That's
Dang.
crazy.
So that was really, really wild. That, obviously, our train gaming group was like, oh well, I mean, can't do this anymore. But thankfully, 18xx.games was around before that, so we still managed to pick it back up. But as far as our D&D group, it's like, well, we just had a session 0, and now we can't like do anything. Like, we weren't prepared to do Roll20 or like do anything online, so it just kind of fizzled until our DM's like, all right, I got a Roll20 account, let's go, and then we managed to pick it back up.
Nice.
But,
Okay, good.
Okay.
yeah, just right before everything just went completely haywire, we were pretty much in like our high time of gaming.
Wow. Wow, that's crazy. So your story, Joe, is kind of similar to mine, but slightly different than everyone's in that I was already started my own like event hosting. I was starting Chicks Can Game, and that was going pretty well for a couple of years. And then 2019 came around, and my partners kind of like dispersed, and so I was flying solo. So I was looking at other opportunities in the gaming sphere, and I actually jumped on and started working with Haba Games. They specialize in like family friendly, that kind of thing. And so I was doing the convention scene in late 2018, early 2019. And I remember doing a road trip down to Gamma. And right when everything was starting to like really ramp up and everybody was like, oh my gosh, are they going to shut stuff down? Is everything going to be on lockdown? And I remember during Gamma, we were not sure if we could like make it back into like make it home because they were starting to like close down borders and all that kind of stuff. And so thankfully we did. We were able to get home because the following week was when everything in Oregon just shut down. So it was like I had some experience like connecting with people, but it wasn't like the online experience. Nothing was like even a possibility at that time. So everything that I had was like sitting in my game room, like, well, what do I do with this now? Because like a lot of these games need multiple people to play with. And at the time, our gaming groups were small, were intimate. And so like when they discouraged anybody from, you have to pick your bubble, isolate within your bubble, that was really difficult for us. So my husband and I were like, okay, well, now we have all these games, like now what do we do? So that was just crazy to think about, and how like everyone's mindset had to shift, right? Because I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, friends, but I think this was kind of one of the first times where like nationwide and even like globally, like borders were shut down. Like no one went outside. Like it felt like a sci-fi movie, right?
Yeah.
Like
At least for our generation. I mean,
Yeah.
I think
sure. That's true.
I think the only thing that would remotely come close to that, I would say, would be 9/11, but it wasn't like global border closings. It was just, us here in the US, but
Right.
that's really the only thing I could compare it to.
Right.
Yeah. And even then, it wasn't like this nationwide lockdown
Yeah.
that occurred.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with that being said, how did you all feel initially? Like, how did it affect you mentally, emotionally? Just like briefly talk about that initial impact on you when you found out, okay, COVID-19 here, we're in this global pandemic. Like, how did that feel? And anyone can start.
Yeah, so for me, that initial switch of pace and everything, that was one of those things that actually worked in my favor career-wise. That was really nice because I had been teaching after school at that point, and teaching after school in person meant traveling a lot to teach for not that long. So a lot of my day was being eaten up while not working that much. And that got switched into remote. So I was able to then do that while also working on my own side project. And that side project eventually landed me my job. So career-wise, there was this like uptick of motivation of, okay, this is like kind of a really perfect setting for me. So there's like motivation in that sense. Socialization wise was interesting. We were locked in our bubble. I think I didn't see Sabrina in person for close to 2 months because she was living with like high risk people that were very
Oh, wow.
nervous. So I didn't see her in person for I think it was close to 2 months. And so there was an initial change of like we were watching movies together virtually, we were playing games together virtually, things like that. Like there was that whole shift. It was very much though for me at that time because leading up to COVID, like before that, I felt like, what the hell am I going to do with my life now? I graduated college. What am I going to do? And it kind of worked in my favor of a switch in perspective in that sense. And I mean, obviously, so a huge thing that helped was not living with anybody high risk in the household. So there was not this huge fear for anybody in our house or anything like that. And all of us had switched to remote. So we were all like, we knew we were going to be okay in that sense. Like it was very likely we were going to be all right there. It was also, though, a little disorienting just seeing New York being like, so New York was one of the first epicenters, right, in America. And I remember where I walked past the ABC7 Eyewitness News building, and those first days I saw one case in Bellevue, not Bellevue, on the First Ave and everything. And then I saw 16 cases, and then the number kept adding up until finally we locked down. So yeah, there was that aspect that really felt post-apocalyptic, and then seeing the Navy Mercy ship come in to New York Harbor and everything like that. So yeah, there was definitely that aspect, but that was my experience. That's like my memory all coming back of that first few months of COVID. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wild.
Yeah. I mean, I'll jump in because I lived with Justin during the whole thing. So similar experience where it actually changed the course of my career even as well. And I have to say, so the first couple of weeks, I remember folks thinking that this was just going to last for like 2 weeks. I will go back to work. And I remember some folks were even thinking that like this wasn't going to happen at all. And I was like, oh no, it's happening. And then like it was Friday when people were like, it's not happening. And that Monday, everything shut down, at least for us. And luckily, my position where I was at, we were taking it seriously. Like my director was taking it seriously. We had everything set up and ready to go for when this happened. So it was a very smooth transition, and I all thanks really to my director. She's brilliant and she was wonderful. But yeah, switching over to everything being online for me was personally, especially since, like Justin said, we didn't have anybody who was like high risk in our home. It turned out really great for me because I am not a very social person, super shy, introverted person. That has changed over the years, and honestly, largely thanks to COVID, which I know is the opposite for a lot of other folks. But I remember telling our mom, who is a very social person, loves going out doing things. She was going nuts, right? Like she was within like the first like 5 minutes. She was like, "This can't happen. Like this is not happening." And we're like, "All right, chillax. It's been like a day." And then of course it turned into more than just a day. But I remember saying because so many times people told me like you have to like break out of your comfort zone and all this stuff and blah blah blah. And then I remember telling them like these extroverted people in my life who were not handling more introverted activities well. I was like, yeah, you got to break out of your comfort zone, how's it feel? So I felt some sort of like retribution there. And it worked out for me as an introverted person to then learn how to communicate with other people because they needed to now to learn how to communicate with someone like me, who is better at communicating like on the virtual scene, or rather than like on the phone or in person or whatever. It's like that takes a lot out of me. So Yeah, the first couple months of lockdown, and the pandemic, yes, it was very post-apocalyptic. Seeing things so empty in New York was crazy. Not that we really left the house all that often, other than like for groceries. But it definitely, oh yeah, the everybody like just taking all the toilet paper and napkins and whatever like off the shelves. Yeah, like you couldn't get anything, and it was like okay. So yeah, so in parts it was kind of like yeah, like you said, Jess, like like a sci-fi movie. And that was scary, but at the on the other hand, for my mental health, uh it actually did wonders in the
Yeah.
first
Put a
couple
pin in
months.
that, Matthew. We'll go back to how it has
Yeah.
impacted us. But just wanted to hear the initial impact and then we'll unpack the rest of that. So thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, Joe, what about you?
So for me, it was kind of a double-edged sword.
Hmm.
So at the beginning, I was like, okay, work was easy because my job was already like 80% remote. So that
Oh,
was,
okay.
completely seamless transition because I was already doing some telework from home. But as far as like socializing with people, we kind of had like limited things going on as it was. Like, we saw our groups maybe once a month as is, so not like we were meeting like multiple times a week or once a week or
Mm.
that frequent. So going from once a month to not at all, I was like, okay, I mean, I could handle this for a while. Before then we weren't doing any gaming, so really nothing different. But as time progressed on, I'm a very outgoing, extroverted person, and I can only take so much introversion.
Mm.
like I have my tendencies. I'm like, all right, I can hunker down for a while. I've got plenty of video games. I can deal. But like month 2 or 3, I'm like, if I don't see another human being in person, I am going to scream.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm right there with you, Joe. I'm very much an extrovert and hosting game nights and it's like I had to make sure everybody, I'm the nice friendly face when you walk
Mhm.
into the game store, So for me, that initial impact of like everything just stopped was kind of like a gut punch. And it just felt like my whole entire personality had to like shift, and that took a toll on me, um mentally, emotionally, all of that kind of stuff. It's actually COVID actually gave me a round of a time. Because of that time I actually got diagnosed with depression and anxiety because of everything that was happening, and it was like I never understood like why am I reacting the way I am. Oh, it's just COVID. Oh, it's just COVID. And actually it wasn't. So that initial reaction to me was very jarring. And also, to your point, Matthew, Mary talked about doing everything remote. Like I had to learn how to game remotely. Like I didn't know about Board Game Arena. I didn't know about Tabletopia. Like
Mhm.
everybody had to install Zoom now, because that at the time when it first started, like that was one of the only video platforms you can do for remote work, And so also being in that curve of like learning how to game online was something that was very interesting for me, having to dive into being a part of the gaming industry from a publisher side. Like, how do we maintain our customer base in the time of COVID? And yes, we understand that people are going to be inside. So that had to ramp up like our online sales. Like, how do we promote these games in a way that are still appealing to people when they can't physically see them yet? Like, we still had inventory in warehouses and things. And so it was like, what are we going to do with all of this stuff? Um, so that was a big shift. And I think for all of us here being content creators, we also had to shift our focus on um, how do we still connect to people in an online space. And so with that, I want to say, kind of going into like our semi final point, but how did shifting into an online space help you as a gamer, either like in the positive response or in a negative response or just neutral response? How did that shift to doing mostly virtual gaming affect you personally and affect your social interactions?
All right, I'll start. So as I said before, like getting in a couple of months of the pandemic, I was just like, okay, I don't know what to do. And it was actually Abby's suggestion, because I had talked about it for the longest time, that I had always wanted to try streaming on Twitch, but, I thought it was, a huge, financial barrier to get in, because the only thing I knew of it was people who did it in like the early 2010s in like its infancy, and you needed like couple $1,000s worth of equipment with like computer capture cards and such to do it. But when I actually looked into it, it was like, okay, great. It's like a webcam and a capture card for like a couple $100 and we're good. I'm like, all right. So the stimulus checks came and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna buy equipment. I'm gonna do this. So I actually started out doing video games online because it's what I knew, it's what I was comfortable with.
Right.
And so I wasn't in the board game content creation space yet until I had discovered it, researching people on Twitch. And I had, I was random like, I wonder if people actually do this on Twitch. And turns out a hell of a lot of us did. So, once I started going into chats and interacting with a bunch of people, it was actually Amanda Panda who made the suggestion that, hey, you should try it, because you're knowledgeable, you know all this stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't have the equipment to do it. I'm like, how am I gonna, shoot top down? How am I gonna, do all this? So once again, stimulus check number 2 came around. I'm like, okay, the government foot the bill the first time, they're gonna foot the bill the second time. So I got some basic stuff. I managed to find some equipment to shoot down, and I did a couple of streams, which were absolutely horrendous. Because this is my 3rd year doing this, and I watched some of my early board game streams, and I don't know if y'all are familiar with the sitcom Frasier, but there's this one episode where he re-listens to his first show and he's like, oh my God, this is terrible. That's how I felt. I'm like, oh my God, who the heck is this complete noob doing this? And it was cringeworthy, but at the same time, like it kind of was a natural shift into doing things online because I was learning it as we went along, not like most people who were, maybe already in the convention scene and doing in-person demos and then having to learn to shift online. I learned it from the ground up. So I guess I was kind of fortunate in that sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. Matthew, what about you? You were starting to talk about that for like your job and moving into remote. How did it feel for you doing gaming stuff remotely?
Yeah, I think similarly to Joe, it felt like a natural progression because we also started as video game streamers I don't know how many years ago, but that had stopped, and like Joe, we were like, yeah, we don't have the equipment, blah blah blah. But it was when lockdown happened. That's when we started to, because we were already doing videos and we were doing a podcast at one point. We had stopped the podcast kind of quickly because we just weren't as into it. We liked the video scene better. And then we were like, you know what, let's try doing streams again. And getting connected with community it seems like people kind of want to get connected. And roll-in rights were off the chart, like left and right. People were coming out with roll-in rights, and we're like, well, that's something that everybody could play with us, and we don't need top-down view or anything like that. We had our dingy little webcams that we needed for work anyway, and it was just us. We put up a little picture of like cartographers, like the cards. We literally took a picture of the cards and then just put it up on screen. We're like, to the objectives, and we'll play. And then every once in a while, we showed it up to the camera, like, this is what we've got so far. What are your points and whatever. And just kind of kept going with that. And then eventually we got more and more equipment as we got more and more into the streaming stratosphere, I guess. So I would say, like Joe, it was sort of a natural progression.
Mhm.
And we had more time to do it too, and more time to connect with people that we wouldn't have connected with, because now others were also getting in on the whole, oh yeah, we could play video game board games online. So now I get to play with all of you who are across the country or even in a different part of the world. And we could actually play games together, play board games together through Board Game Arena or whatever, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Justin.
Yeah, it is interesting the amount of extra free time we had let us really delve into different aspects of the hobby and stuff. And one aspect that was actually offline was, since Matthew and I still lived in the same house at that point, was we played like Twilight Struggle in the backyard. We played War of the Ring like 3 weeks in a row, kind of thing. Like we were able to do those sorts of things that mainly because of the time. And then in terms, it really opened our eyes to digitally playing board games. So I think
Right.
before then, I would have been, and I'm sure Matthew as well, would have had much less interest in playing a board game digitally. It's like, well,
Mhm.
I'm just going to go and play a video game if I'm playing on my computer.
Yep.
And I think now it's just something that I'm much more open to because of that, and seeing how much you can enjoy playing a board game digitally. So that was a lot of fun, being able to just log on and quickly play a board game. No setup, learn the rules really easily because you can't get a rule wrong in a digital board game, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was and I would say that we quickly transitioned into that as well. It didn't feel like this major shift over to it with trying to play online with people like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. So it seemed like pretty smooth for a lot of you all. My insight into doing remotely came from, like I said, from a different perspective, in that I was working for a publisher at the time. And thankfully my boss, they lived like 15 minutes from my house. So they actually became part of my bubble so we could still keep working.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
And so,
That's cool.
yeah, so because of that, we all like, it was like me and David, my husband, and them and their partner, and like we joined up and we did our 4 together. And so like they would come over to like do remote work together, and I'd go over to their house and we would do remote work. And then in the evening time, like our spouses would come over, and then it's like, okay, now we have a game night kind of thing. But in terms of like doing things online, we had to find out, like I said, how to keep our business going, how to keep our customer base happy. And so that's when I found about Discord, and I had to do research on Twitch. And so a lot of the folks that I would watch on Twitch were just basically on like research purposes, like how do they continue to game online and maintain like a fan base and stuff. And so some of the earlier people that I was watching were Game Freak Geek, Monique, and More Games Please, Ross, and for Chits and Giggles, Russell. And I remember them, basically it was just kind of like a talking head, like, I'm going to talk to you all for a bit. And I think it was therapeutic, because I think on the flip side, they just wanted it for their own mental stability. And so having that like conversation, yes, people were typing in the chat, so it didn't feel one-sided. But I could relate to that because, yes, being an extrovert like Joe and myself, I needed that. I needed that people interaction. And before I got into gaming, I did radio for a while. So I was like, okay, I'm used to just talking at the ether, like I didn't have to have like people responding to me. And so I was like, maybe this is something I can do. And so going through and watching other people's channels, and I think around the same time, Amanda Panda was starting up, and Joe as well. And so I was like, okay, I think I can do this. So again, I just had my webcam that I was using for Zoom and for all those video calls. And I started just playing things that I would have taught at a game night. So it was like people can just watch my stream and play it. So it was stuff like cartographers. It was stuff that people didn't need to actually own the physical game in order to play. And I think that kind of was like the impetus for me to continue on doing my channel in that way, so that when people drop in and out, they don't have to feel like obligated to buy a game or to like come prepared, like, oh shoot, if I don't come right when the stream starts, I'm going to be out of luck. No, I wanted to make that feeling happen. So I was recreating the game night feel that I would do in person for people dropping in and dropping out, but doing it on an online space. And eventually, yes, those stimulus checks did help, Joe. That I was like, oh, okay, now I can get a larger computer processing, you know, because at the moment I was just running stuff off my laptop, which for those of you that are newbies, don't do that. It's not great. Your little dinky computers cannot handle that. So like having all of that to help with getting those equipment things too. But I also will say for all of us, I think is true that being on the content creator community, I think we all were helping each other grow in that way. Like we were all talking to each other. We were all hanging out in each other's chats.
Yeah.
And so we would comment and be like, dude, how did you get that top down to look so wonderful? You know, like, where did you get your lights at? And like, there were Discord for like, you know, group chats and all that kind of stuff. And so from there, coming from like a gamer's perspective, from being on the publishing side, that was really, really helpful for us because I could see like, this is what people are longing for. So in turn, as a gaming publisher, we should do this. And so I think that's when a lot of the online conventions started happening. So you had a lot of people that just jumped into Discord and, you know, trial by fire essentially because everybody was not super savvy on Discord at the time. So that was a whole nother cluster. But people getting in and like jumping into a game room to like play games and stuff, that was all kind of this new thing. But we all made it work. Like it wasn't like one person paving the way. I think it was just a lot of people slowly paving the way. And then we all kind of just followed suit with it. And I think that's kind of where I saw the beauty of the community kind of come rallying together. And like, we all want to continue being gamers. How do we continue being gamers with this parameter that we now find ourselves in? So one last thing, I think we'll probably pause this and maybe do this as like a part 2, but if you would say one, like a 1 or 2 minute sentence or sentences that you want to share, like how do you see the future of online gaming in the midst of the pandemic? How do you see this as being like a good thing, a not so good thing? Like what is your overall takeaway, would you say? And I'll kind of give an example from myself so you all can kind of understand. I think from the pandemic, yes, it was terrible. Yes, it has changed. Like we're in the history books now, right? Like we have made history. And from this takeaway, I think that the community can grow to become more welcoming and more developed because we had to adapt, right? We had to adapt. And so in a sense of welcoming gamers to the table, there's now more accessibility for people to access games than there had been in the past. We have online platforms now. We have websites. We have Discord servers. We have in-person game nights. We have those things where print and plays now exist, right? So you don't even have to have the physical game. You can do a print and play of something and even print and play to like a PDF. So you don't even have to own a printer. There is now, I think this has exponentially grown the hobby so that it can become more accessible. Whether or not that's a good thing is still yet to come. But I think an overall takeaway we can see in a positive light is that because of this pandemic, the hobby is now grown more accessible than I feel it was in the past. And I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, just to add to that, I definitely, that's exactly what I was thinking of as well. I think it's just easier now for people to go and play games. Sometimes there are games that I want to try but don't want to buy, and I can now play that digitally to some Board Game Arena. But also, I have found that digital board gaming has not replaced my want for playing physical board games. And I would much rather set up a physical board game night than a digital board game night. What's really neat, though, is I get to go and play digital board games with people that live nowhere near me. You know, over the pandemic and even after like when the lockdown really started to like stop and all that, and everything was opening up again. I played with our cousin that lives in Turkey a few times on Board Game Arena. You know, that's something that would have never happened beforehand. So I think overall, to me, that aspect is a positive, and I think it was just kind of waiting for that catalyst for a bunch of board gamers to see that, like, oh yeah, there is something neat here in the digital realm.
Yeah, agreed.
I think in terms of when we think also about like what happened during lockdown, there's more conscientious thought put into inclusivity in board gaming. Um, and we still have a ways to go, but I think that from before the pandemic to after lockdown, uh, I think I've seen growth in inclusivity in board gaming. And it's still continuing to grow, but I love that people are really starting to actually think about it and bring it to their conscious mind frame. On the other hand, those even extroverted folks have now had a difficult time transitioning back into like social life. And so when it comes to like conventions or going to like your local friendly game store to meet new people and everything, I think that folks are having a more difficult time doing that as opposed to before lockdown, because we did go through a global trauma that we are not treating as such, I think. And really, I could go on a whole soap opera, but maybe that'll be part two. Because I did talk a lot about like the good things of COVID, but there were really some terrible things, and I was affected in poor ways as well that I didn't really get into here. But maybe we'll leave that for part two.
Well, I think it also depends on location too, because yes, the pandemic locked everything down and kind of had this shift to online. But even before COVID-19 happened, like I still had a difficulty finding people to game. It was dang near impossible. Like we like scoured like the bottom of the barrel of like Reddit and like online forums, and we fortunately found like the 18xx group accidentally, and you know, we got welcomed in. But before that, it's like, I don't know, maybe it's just the Pacific Northwest, but people here are not very welcoming when it comes to gaming groups. Like everybody has their tight knit groups already, and you know, it's very, very hard to break that in. And even after lockdown, it's still that way. So I think it's just dependent on where you are. You know, other areas of the country are more welcoming, others are not. I mean, that's my experience anyway. But as far as an accessibility standpoint, I think it has, you know, to mirror what Jess said, it's a great thing that anybody and everybody can go online and see somebody playing like the new thing, and they don't have to go to a convention or they don't have to go buy it to see these games. And I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, agreed. And I think we are just scratching the surface here on the topic, because yes, I would love to dive into some of the hardships and some of the difficulties that COVID did bring on us for social engagement and things like that. But we need to wrap up for right now. So I want to say thank you to Joe and Matthew and Justin. And my name is Jess, and I will say we are the Adequate Four. Be sure to like and subscribe. Click that little button down below. If you have any comments or questions that you want us to ask or answer, ask this question next time. No. If you have any questions you want us to answer, please write them in the comments below, and we'll try to get them as best as possible answered in the quickest amount of time. But yeah, until next time, remember, friends, when it comes to tabletop gaming, you don't have to be great. You just have to be adequate. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.